It is London, 1850. Gas lamps flicker, polished carriages line a fog-filled street. Inside a grand townhouse, aristocrats gather, champagne glasses glinting, curiosity electric. At the center of the drawing room lies a coffin painted with ancient hieroglyphs, a body that once sailed the Nile 3,000 years ago. Tonight, it will be unwrapped for entertainment. This isn't a horror novel. This was fashionable Victorian society. Victorian Britain was in the grip of Egyptomania. Napoleon's campaigns had electrified Europe with tales of pyramids and pharaohs. Britain's empire, flush with wealth, shipped home ancient wonders, statues, scrolls, and above all, mummies. Mummies were surprisingly easy to buy. Dealers in Alexandria and Cairo sold them to travelers. Some were stacked in warehouses. To Victorians, they were both souvenirs and status symbols, proof of wealth, education, and global reach. Some even believed mummy powder, ground human remains, could cure illness or add vitality. Apothecaries stocked mumia. Artists used it to make a rich brown pigment called mummy brown. But a new trend turned commodity into performance: the mummy unwrapping party. Invitations arrived embossed and mysterious. An evening with the pharaohs. Witness the unveiling of antiquity. Guests prepared as if for the theater. Silk gowns, black coats, jewels flashing under gaslight. A single mummy might cost the host a fortune, but the social payoff was enormous. Knowledge, prestige, gossip. Picture the parlor, velvet drapes, candlelight flickering against gilt frames and glass cases. Egyptian artifacts lined the walls, scarabs, papyrus scrolls, tiny statues of Anubis. Incense burned, masking the scent of centuries-old resin. The coffin sat center stage, propped for all to see. Hosts often made speeches, grand statements about science and culture, but everyone knew curiosity and thrill were the true draw. At last, the cutting started. A knife slit through linen darkened with ancient oils, bandages, brittle yet perfumed with bitumen and spices, fell in long ribbons. Each layer revealed amulets, beads, or faint traces of hieroglyphs. Sometimes a gold charm slipped free and vanished into a guest's pocket. As the face emerged, skin leathery and sunken, some guests gasped. Others edged closer, fascinated. The room buzzed with nervous energy. For a moment, the boundary between living and dead felt thin. One famous night drew half of London's elite. Surgeon and showman Thomas "Mummy" Pettigrew announced he would unwrap a royal woman, the so-called Princess of Thebes. Hundreds crowded into a lecture hall. Reporters scribbled notes. Pettigrew narrated as if telling a ghost story, how priests had embalmed her, how amulets protected her journey to the afterlife. As he worked, charms and painted wrappings appeared. Gasps filled the hall when the woman's delicate hands emerged, still bearing traces of rings. The Times wrote the next day that the event was, at once instructive and profoundly strange. Some attendees whispered of unease, watching a queen's body reduced to curiosity. Yet the spectacle made Pettigrew famous and inspired imitators across Britain. In London's high society, Lady Valerie Mew, notorious for her exotic collections, hosted private unwrappings in her drawing room. One evening, she unveiled a beautifully painted coffin said to hold a priestess. Guests crowded so close that linen and amulets scattered across the carpet. When the night ended, several small charms and beads were missing. Rumor swirled that aristocratic guests had pocketed relics as keepsakes. Newspapers hinted, but never named names. The scandal only fueled demand for invitations to her next event. To some Victorians, this was daring and glamorous. To others, it felt like grave robbery dressed as entertainment. Why did it captivate them? Victorian Britain was deeply fascinated by death. Black mourning clothes, elaborate funerals, hair jewelry, post-mortem portraits. Yet strict society rarely allowed open talk about mortality. Mummy parties let the elite flirt with death safely, exotic, far away, and stripped of personal grief. They could confront mortality while sipping champagne. It was also an act of power. To own and dismantle a pharaoh's remains symbolized Britain's imperial dominance, and it fed an appetite for the macabre long before modern horror films or true crime podcasts. But each party destroyed history. Linen thrown away, inscriptions lost, remains fragmented. What scholars now treasure, DNA, burial objects, cultural context, was carelessly discarded. Some Victorians eventually felt shame. Letters survived describing unease. I could not forget the face revealed. It was as though I had robbed a grave. By the late 1800s, Egyptology matured. Professional archaeologists condemned these shows as desecration. Egypt itself began restricting export of mummies and artifacts. The unwrapping parties faded. But fascination with death never really died. Today, travelers line up to walk catacombs, visit ossuaries, and view preserved saints and mummies, this time behind museum glass. Dark tourism flourishes, from the Paris catacombs to murder houses and disaster sites, and our entertainment thrives on real death. True crime documentaries, cold case podcasts, dramatized autopsies. We unwrap human stories layer by layer, not with knives and candles, but with cameras and curiosity. The line between education and spectacle is still thin. What Victorians did in candlelit parlors, we sometimes do on screens. Only the stage has changed. The mummy unwrapping parties of Victorian England were a collision of curiosity, power, and disregard. They gave guests wonder, but also robbed ancient people of dignity. History is fragile. Once unwrapped, it cannot be rewrapped. Would you have attended, champagne in hand, leaning closer as each bandage fell? Or turned away, knowing you were watching a life become spectacle? Tell us in the comments. Subscribe to Silent Shadows of History for more dark and forgotten tales.